still a few more people joining, but I'm going to start by talking a little bit about how I got interested in shamanism, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how shamanism and NLP compare. It might seem like an odd thing to compare those two, if you know anything about the topics, but I think it's useful to take a look at some of the ways that they're the same and some of the ways that they're different. So I started reading about shamanism when I was a student at Harvard, I was a grad student, and it was just an academic interest. Back then, shamanism wasn't as popular as it is now. There weren't that many books on it. So I just started doing some reading on my own, just for my own interest, and found it. I was studying linguistics at the time, historical linguistics, and I was interested in some of the religious texts that were the Rig Veda, Zoroastrian texts, and I thought that some of the things I was learning about shamanism in these books was very interesting. But it was, and this was back in the 70s, but at the same time, my brother Robert was beginning to learn about NLP when they were still inventing NLP at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And but back then there wasn't a lot of information on shamanism. I kept reading what I could find, and as time went on, there were things that happened in my life, as they happen to many of us, that made me sort of interested in finding an authentic spiritual tradition. So in the 90s, I had the opportunity to take a workshop. Michael Harner, who is an anthropologist trained at the University of California and who studied shamanism around the world. He went and sampled, studied with shamans in different countries in South America and Siberia, and wrote a book called The Way of the Shaman, in which he summarizes what he learned and tried to extract the essential core beliefs of shamanism, the core traditions, the core essence shamanism from around the world. So Michael Harner taught a workshop in San Francisco, which I attended, and that was my first experiential contact with shamanism. The first time I actually experienced is more than just something to read about in a book, and it was a very powerful experience, and it's stayed with me. The experience I had that day still stays with me, and encouraged me to study shamanism some more. Now, in the meantime, my brother was studying NLP, and so I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about how shamanism and NLP compare. You wouldn't think, like I said in my little introduction, they're kind of in different, like at different edges of the universe. NLP is a very modern, uh, very modern approach to dealing with the way that people interact with their world. It's based on modern theories of linguistics and neuroscience and uh, cybernetics, computer programming. So it's very much part of the modern world and a modern way of looking at things. Um, in NLP, as most of you probably are familiar with NLP, I assume, basically NLP claims that reality isn't what we think it is. It's something that we actually construct, and that each of us has our own map of reality that we've built based on our experiences and on what we've been. And our maps may overlap a little bit, but each map is different in significant ways. And that our behavior, as we interact with our world, is a result of our concepts about this map, of our thinking habits, our little programs that we've installed that help us to understand the experiences that come and put a structure on them. And if we run into problems, if we run into, we sort of paint ourselves into a corner in our little maps. NLP teaches that if we're aware of some of these processes we use to create our reality, that we can actually improve things. We can make changes. We can make significant changes. We can improve our situation in reality if we understand how we've created it, and we can expand our map. We can create a bigger map that gives us more options. Oh wow, this screen just got bigger. So the way that NLP developed is the founders of NLP, John Grinder and Richard Bandler, studied therapists who were successful therapists and tried to understand what they were doing in terms of their use of language and their interaction with the uh, neurology of their. And um, they studied a medical hypnotist named Milton Erickson, who was very excellent results using hypnosis, which is at that time not a very well respected approach. And so he ran into a lot of controversy doing hypnosis, but he had results that you couldn't argue with. So Bandler and Grinder and their students studied the techniques of Milton Erickson, and they realized that by putting into a trance suggestions, he was able to expand their map of the universe even more quickly. He was able to, in their terms, sort of bypass the conscious mind, the mind that was assembling and creating reality, and kind of talk to the unconscious mind, get to those programs that are running under the surface, and make subtle modifications to them so that his patients' lives are improved. So the early founders of NLP understood that altered states of consciousness, like hypnotic trance, could be useful if you wanted to make changes to your reality and improve the options that were available to you in dealing with the reality that you created for yourself. Now, also I should note that the third generation NLP, which is what my brother Robert is teaching now, acknowledges that there's, in addition to what's going on in the individual mind, there are interactions between other minds. There's sort of a field mind, a group mind, and that geniuses like Mozart are able to tap into something that's beyond their own consciousness when they're composing music, making poems, making inventions. Some of these geniuses get information from elsewhere, not from their own experience, not from their app, but from someplace else. And so Robert calls this the field. But basically, the purpose of these techniques that have been developed as part of NLP is to provide a broader range of choices, to expand the individual map so that you have a broader definition. And there's all kinds of that's a very simplified view. There's all kinds of very specific techniques that have been developed for different purposes. But just to compare it this far, what we've talked about with NLP to shamanism, what I think is interesting is that one of the things that the NLP shares with shamanism is this assumption that our ordinary reality, our everyday, the way we think about the world in our everyday lives, isn't fixed, and it isn't real reality. That it's reality isn't what we think it is. There's other realities. There's other ways of looking at the world beyond the limited map that we've all created for ourselves. In the core shamanic belief that Michael Harner has proposed, most shamanic traditions regard ordinary reality, the world we live in every day, they call it the middle world, as really being the result of projections from two other worlds. In most shamanic, an upper world and a lower world. And these worlds are inhabited by beings, beings that don't have a physical body the way we think of it, but are very powerful beings. And their interactions are what create our reality here. It's sort of like the myth that Plato has of the cave, where the people can't see what's casting the shadow on the wall. All they can see is the shadow, but they know there's something else there that's beyond their vision that's creating the shadow play that they're watching. That's the view that many of these shamanic cultures have about the world that we live in every day, that there are spiritual powers that are creating the experiences that, and the way to change something is to get into contact, to interact with these spiritual beings. But not everybody can do that. In the shamanic view, you need special training to be a shaman in order to make contact and interact successfully with these other beings. So the way that a shaman does this is to make a journey, not a physical journey, but a spiritual journey. A shaman can travel to the upper world, to the lower world, or even in the middle world, essentially sending his or her consciousness outside the body and projecting it into these other worlds. The way that, so basically what we would call this experience that they regard as a journey, what we would call this in our modern terminology is a trance. And there's no good scientific definition for a trance. It's just an altered state of consciousness. It can be very profound or not so profound. But the shamanic journey is a trance state. And the job of the shaman then, once he goes on one of these journeys, is to negotiate with these spiritual beings and to represent the community, help members of the community. And the typical view of the inhabitants of this upper world and lower world, and what Koharner calls core shamanism, is that in the lower world you have spiritual beings who usually are in the form of animals, animal spirits. In the upper world you have beings that are in the form of humans, and we might call them angels or gods or divine beings, or maybe just um, higher aspects of our own selves in the upper world, or ancestors in the upper world. And these beings are the ones who are responsible for events that happen in the middle world that we experience here. If we want to change something, we need to arrange it by sending a shaman to talk to somebody down there or to talk to somebody up there. Now, the similarities then, just to sort of review, is that in NLP and shamanism is that our ordinary reality is not really real. It's not fixed and it can be changed, and that an altered state of consciousness makes it easier to accomplish these changes. Now, the methods that are used to achieve altered states are of course different in NLP and in shamanism. We talked about NLP using hypnosis, hypnotic suggestion. Their work on Milton Erickson is fascinating. How he basically tells a little story, adds hidden commands to relax and to think about something comfortable, and he tells what seems to be an innocent story, and then plants these little suggestions uh, into the story as he can. The methods to achieve altered states in shamanism are, of course, uh, different from that, and there's actually a variety of methods that have been used over time in different cultures to uh, embark on a spirit journey, embark on a shamanic journey, to leave the body behind and to enter a state of ecstasy. So ecstasy literally means standing outside. It comes from the Latin for standing outside. So basically, it's an out-of-body experience. It's leaving the body behind, having your consciousness leave the body behind and going out on its own to explore a broader reality that the body by itself can't understand. The paths to ecstasy that have been used, uh, there's a wide variety of them we may be familiar with, and some may seem a little bizarre. We're familiar with Zen meditation. So meditation is it's really a discipline. It takes years to develop in order to achieve enlightenment. And enlightenment is really the same thing as seeing the quote real world for what it is a construction of our own consciousness. Then there's the Lakota Indians in North America used fasting and sleep deprivation. So you'd not eat food and stay awake for several days, and pretty soon you'd start having visions. This is how Crazy Horse had his great visions. He went out in the woods, didn't eat anything, slept on a bed of sharp, so he couldn't really sleep deeply. And after a while, he started seeing visions of all these helping spirits that came to him and protected him in battle. Now, this is from a Western point of view, the meditation takes too long. I mean, we're into instant gratification. So this devoting yourself to years and years of deep meditation seems like a kind of a very significant investment to make if you want to solve a few. And going through this effort of fasting and wakefulness also seems kind of unpleasant. There are other techniques that have been used by people, primitive, traditional people from time to time that are rather unpleasant. The If you've heard of the Lakota sun dance, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes pain, one can achieve ecstasy. Um, there's ecstatic dancing, you know, dancing all night long until you collapse and start having visions. That's used by a tribe in Africa. So there's all kinds of techniques that have been used. And Michael Harner went out when he did his study of shamanism and sampled all of these. And what he determined after trying them out, well, of course, we haven't mentioned psychedelic drugs like ayahuasca, and Michael Hunter tried. That's in that the common mind sort of associates shamanism with ayahuasca. You have to use drugs in order to be a shaman. Michael Hunter actually tried that. What he found was that all of these techniques, including the ayahuasca, are some of them are very dangerous, some of them are very unpleasant. But what he found worked the best was drumming, listening to a drum being beat at a specific rhythm, and he calls this shamanic drumming. And it's a technique that is widespread. The oldest shamanic cultures, from what we can tell, use drumming. Many of the modern traditional cultures use drumming. You see pictures of shamans carrying the frame drum, and they regard that as their horse, the vehicle that they use to travel from world to world. And according to Michael Harner, um, drumming is safer, pleasanter, and more effective than any of these other. Works better for more people and is less dangerous. So he recommends the listening to this shamanic drumming, and that's what we used when I took the class from Michael Harner back in the 90s. He sat there with the drum and drummed, and we all journeyed, and it was quite a interesting experience for most of the people that were in the class. Now, the drumming worked because of the principle of entrainment. So the drumming, as I mentioned, has to take place at a specific frequency. And Michael Harner recommends about 205 to 220 beats per minute. So just a steady rhythm. It's not like you're in a drumming circle and everyone's pounding as hard as they can. It's just one person drumming, steady rhythm, 205 to 220 beats per minute. And this works because it entrains the brain. The reason that an EEG produces that little waveform is because the cells of the human brain exchange information at a specific frequency. But this frequency changes based on the level of awareness, based on actually the uh, the state of consciousness. So normally, probably most of us out there are running at about 12 to 30 hertz, 12 to 30 cycles per second. All your brain cells are exchanging energy and information as you're listening to me, probably. Now, I might be running a little higher because I'm trying to think about what to say next. So I might have a little bit more concentration. I'm probably a little bit higher at 30. I mean, if I were working on a really hard math problem, I could probably get up to 100 hertz. So 30 to 100 hertz is the gamma frequency, and that is heightened concentration. And if we start to relax, as you start to go into a hypnotic trance, your frequency will slow down. And from 12 to 30 hertz, which is your normal beta state of consciousness, you might go to 8 to 12 hertz, 8 to 12 cycles per second, which is alpha. So that's just a relaxed state of mind, a relaxed state of consciousness. If you relax a little bit more, you're going to start to go to sleep. And that borderline between relaxation and sleep is called the theta state, and it's about 4 to 7 hertz. Once you drop below 4 hertz, you'll be asleep, and you won't be able to hear anything I say. So the drum beat at 205 to 220 beats per minute is in that theta range. It's in that range of 4 to 7 hertz. So listening to the drum beat, listening to that sonic driving, you have the audio coming in at a regular rate. All your brain cells are firing every time that comes in, and that brings you down where you're sort of on the verge of falling asleep, but not quite asleep. And the advantage of doing this while you're awake instead of falling asleep is that you're still aware of what's going on and you can remember most of what happens. And when you get into this theta state, you start getting spontaneous, seeing these spontaneous images. You're in a borderline dream state. These images will come to you. Sometimes you'll hear voices. It'll start to be similar to being in a dream. I mean, we're all familiar with being in a dream, but most of us have a hard time remembering what happens. Is audio smooth for everyone else? Oh, well, I hope you guys can all hear me okay. I see someone saying that the audio wasn't smooth. So, but the drumming is the key to is the key to launching into a shamanic journey, launching into a spiritual journey with us. So it's a technique sort of appeals to the those of us in the modern world who like to have, you know, instantaneous feedback and don't want to devote a lot of time or effort into developing some of these other techniques. Okay, so the now, how do you get to the upper world or the lower world? Because I said, as I mentioned, there in the core shamanic belief system, there's an upper world and a lower world. Basically, that's done by intention. So you start to listen to the drum beat and you intend that you're going to go down. You imagine yourself maybe entering into a tunnel that takes you down or some other thing that will take you downward. And you follow the drum beat and you intend to go to the lower world and you'll end up lower world. And when you get into the lower world, you'll meet different beings. Um, and as I said, they typically will have the form uh, of animals, like totem animals. If people are familiar with the animal cards, these are the kinds of energies that you encounter in the lower world. How do you get to the upper world? Again, you intend to go up, and you imagine that you're entering um, a tunnel that goes up, or you can. One of the traditional ways of going to the upper world is going into a fireplace and going up the chimney, and you follow the smoke and the drum, and it takes you up to the upper world, where you'll encounter uh, beings in human form, angels, gods, ancestors, helpers that a human shape. Um, so, do you need to believe that there really are these spirits out there to use shamanism? I mean, for the Western mind, sometimes it's a little stressed to think that that there's all these spirits flying around, and it seems well, it seems to disagree with what modern science tells us. But you know, you can sort of take the Jungian approach if you'd like. Instead of thinking of these beings as spirits, you can think of them as projections of your own unconscious mind. You can think of them as parts of yourself that have been neglected maybe in your everyday life, parts of yourself that you don't acknowledge as you proceed in your normal routine, but that are waiting for you to take a look and say, oh, I see you down there, or I see you up there. I know you're there ready to help me. Because they're usually very willing to come to your assistance when you ask. There's when you find these spirits, and you can usually tell that you're having a um, a legitimate journey because you're you're not creating these visions. You're not they come spontaneously. They're not something that it's not like daydreaming where you're deliberately imagining them. It's not like a hypnotic session where someone's suggesting that you see these things. They just pop into your mind. And if you allow them, they will show you lots of interesting things. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about, well, another way, I guess, of thinking about these spirits is that they're resources or mentors, what we would call in NLP, resources or mentors from within that you're making contact with. And they're there to provide information and advice. So um, the way they help is not by, they don't usually communicate via language. They don't, very bad sound, oh dear. They don't, it's not a linguistic experience when you encounter these spirit beings. They communicate via images, symbols, archetypal images. I'm sorry for everyone who's having trouble hearing. It looks like some of the audio is breaking up for people. But we will have a recording, Camilla says. So. Um, so, and the way that they communicate information to you is similar to what you experience in a dream. And a lot of times, the meaning of one of your experiences will be specific to you. It'll be something that another person might not even understand, but it will have significance specifically for you, and which sort of backs up the perhaps these beings that you encounter are really parts of yourself that need to be acknowledged and that are waiting to help you. So the way that that shamanism works is it sort of gives you permission to indulge in your imagination, permission to sort of open up to just let the drum take you where you need to go, and to trust in the process that you will find the information you need to help you make the next step on your journey in the middle world. So the traditionally shamans. Oh dear, okay, most of the people are hearing. I'm looking at what's coming up. Traditionally, um, shamans help people with a variety of problems, and as a human species, we haven't really changed that much. We sort of live in a very different material environment than the ancient peoples that practiced shamanism did. But we still have the same issues in day-to-day life. We still have the same issues with relationships, with finding places a safe place to live, with finding food, with finding fulfillment in our lives. So the issues that shamans used to help people with are the typical ones. Health has always been an issue throughout mankind's history. Wealth, career, economic well-being. Shamans used to help people find the best places to hunt, the best time of the year to plant. Uh, Relationships with family, relationships with romantic relationships. Shamans provided advice on all of these things. Protection. Shamans were able to provide people with ways to stay safe while they were traveling and to protect themselves from negative energy. And divination. That's something that we're always interested in knowing, especially with the stock market nowadays. But in past time, when life was more insecure, people wanted to know, how was this battle going to turn out? How was uh, the hunting trip going to turn out? What was going to happen the next day? And so shamans were very good at providing that kind of information. A modern application of shamanism that probably wasn't so important in the past is creativity. Um, Going on a shamanic journey is a good way of opening up to new ideas and to finding inspiration if you're working on a creative project. Um, the Some examples of information that the kind of information that you can get from shamanism. I like to go to some of the scientific discoveries that have occurred in dream states. Um, there's a famous chemist, Auguste Kekule, who discovered the structure of the benzene ring. He was working on this problem for a long time, and one day while he was on a bus, he started to daydream, and he saw a snake swallowing its tail, like the worm Ouroboros in alchemical sense. And that stimulated him to realize that maybe the benzene molecule was a ring, just like the snake swallowing its tail. Dmitry Mendeleev was working on the periodic table of elements, and one night he had a dream that showed him several different versions of the periodic, which one of those was the best. Nikola Tesla, who's a famous genius and has been studied by Brother Robert in his books on geniuses, was working on he's trying to develop a motor that would use AC current. And he was working on this so hard that he finally, um, he didn't sleep for weeks because he was just focusing on this problem and working very hard on this problem, struggling to try and solve it. Finally, he sort of had a breakdown. He had a complete, mental and physical breakdown, and almost died. And he gradually came out of this and was recovering. One day he was walking with a friend in a park. He was actually reciting a poem by Goethe, And suddenly he had a revelation where the structure of this engine was completely clear to him. So he grabbed a stick and drew a diagram in the dirt, and that became the basis for his um, discovery of the AC engine. So there's lots of information that can come in these dream states that is that's very accurate, very valuable, and even though most of us are dealing with more mundane issues, it's useful to it can still be useful to travel in this way and encounter this altered state of consciousness and try and find solutions to the problems that we face. What kinds of input can you expect to receive when you're on one of these journeys? Um, well, the if you go to the lower world and encounter these animal helpers, a lot of times it's a bit of a surprise what animal will show up. It's not one you expect usually, and that way you know that's a legitimate experience. Um, there's one uh, person who I took on one of these journeys who saw herself being carried by ants. She saw all these ants came out and grabbed her and carried her away. And she realized later that this was a message for her to rely more on her toward her. It's uh, a very nice metaphor for relying on community support. Um, when I went on my first journey, I found my helping animal was a frog. And a surprise to me. I never expected that it would be a little frog, but this frog sort of gave me a grand tour of the lower world, and I realized that the frog was sort of a message to me to learn to bridge different realities. You know, the reality of academia and science and spiritual reality. Um, other animals you might be a bear, and a bear is a symbol of since the bear hibernates in the winter, it's not afraid to put its ego aside in order to be awake as a transformed being. You might encounter an imaginary animal that doesn't really exist in the real world, like a dragon. And the symbology of dragon has to do with the will, the fire of the unyielding will that launches ideas out into the world. Uh, you might encounter or have symbolic value, like a snake is a symbol of transformation. Leave your old skin behind, take on a new identity. Um, I had one journeyer who encountered a wolf and was sort of afraid because he didn't want to acknowledge that sort of wild part of himself. But as we continued to journey, he made peace with it and realized that his wild nature could be brought into harmony with the requirements of civilized life. So Um, so these are the types of experiences you might encounter on one of these journeys. People have gone to the upper world and encountered their own ancestors, grandmothers, grandfathers that have passed on and gave them advice. Um, uh, the the trick with these journeys is sort of sometimes understanding and interpreting the information that you're given. So I guess when I come back and do a follow up to this, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can use shamanism to do self coaching and how it's a valuable tool for developing your own inner mentors and your own inner helpers. Um, I sort of am willing to entertain questions at this point if anybody would like to ask anything. The follow on to this lecture will be on uh, February 1st. Oh, so using the other instruments aside from drumming is useful as well, the didgeridoo. Anything that has rattles, anything that has that regular beat that can take you down into the um, that can take you down into the theta range is a good tool for doing journeying. I actually have a CD that I've made that has the long period of drumming that is based on the drumming that I use in my classes. How do you take someone on a journey? So um, the way that you take someone on a journey is by providing you provide a safe environment. Well, okay, here the way that you start a journey is you use a little bit of sensory deprivation. You need to have a darkened room. It's best to have a darkened room. It's best to reduce input from visual input because you're doing a auditory journey. You're relying on auditory input system to make your journey. So you want to reduce visual input. A lot of times it's good to put on a blindfold, and you can either do the journey sitting up or you can down. Again, reducing any other input besides the auditory. And in this darkened room, you can provide a safe space for someone to listen to the drumming. And the drumming, you usually need about 20 minutes, 12 to 20 minutes in order to lock into that state of consciousness. Some people take a little bit longer. Some people can do it faster. Once you've done it a few times, it becomes a lot easier to get there. You sort of train yourself to enter that state more quickly. And as I said, you can do a shamanic journey on your own if you have a source of the sound input. It's hard to journey while you're drumming, as I can tell you from experience, because you sort of have to stay present in the body in order to maintain the rhythm. But if you have a CD and MP3 you can listen to that lasts 12 to 20 minutes, that's a very useful tool, and you can take a journey all on your own. Just go in a darkened room, turn on the drumming, and that is that's a good way to start to do some self-coaching using the shamanic tradition. Okay, is there a standard way to interpret visions? I know there's a lot of stuff going on, and is there a standard way to interpret visions, or is it up to the person on the journey? As I said, the visions are usually very individual. Um, it's just like interpreting a dream. I mean, there are books that tell you, okay, if you dream about X, it means Y. Sometimes they're applicable in sort of a broad way, but you really have to use your own experience in order to interpret one of these messages properly and apply it to your own life. Uh, what I usually do is I start with if I encounter one of these beings, I start with traditional symbolism of them, because that's, as Jung would say, that's part of our collective unconscious. But then looking at how to apply that to your own life, you need to sort of be open to what the basic symbolic meaning has to do with your own experiences. Um, let's see, to integrate a past journey. Yeah, I'm looking at all these questions here. So a follow-on journey is always useful if you still have questions after going on one journey and need more information. The way it works is once you've sort of made contact with one of these spirit beings, spiritual essences in the other world, they stay with you. And if you go back, you usually encounter the same. I mean, some people have several different helpers in the other world, but usually you want to build a relationship with one of these beings, and so that they'll be more willing to help you, so that they'll understand more about your needs. And you want to sort of take the middle world. And so when you come back to the middle world, you want to learn everything you can about the habits of this animal that you met, perhaps, and maybe you want to collect images of them. You want to bring them into your life and honor their presence in your life. And the more you do that, the more they'll be able to help you. Yes, Greg says didgeridoo is very effective. and drops the brain into states of deep relaxation. Now, you can also combine the didgeridoo with drumming. You can have the drum in the background and the didge playing in the foreground, and that works even better because it's combining both of the auditory input. Okay, finding a shaman you can trust. Um, I would recommend there's a organization founded by Michael Harner called the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, FSS, Foundation for Shamanic Studies. They have a website. I think it's foundationforshamanic.studies.org. If you look up Foundation for Shamanic Studies, you should be able to find it. They provide a listing of shamanic practitioners, what countries they cover, but they do provide a listing of the people who have trained with Michael. And since I've done that, I obviously trust those people. So that would be a good place to start at least. Address this question. Okay, the problem is I can only see like the last. I can only see the last few on the screen here. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to start with this last question here. Is a shamanic journey exclusively induced, or could it happen spontaneously? Uh, it usually begins as being induced, but after you've been on a journey, sometimes I forget to mention, after you've been on a journey, sometimes you'll find in the world there's still little maybe eruptions of the other world into your middle world existence. You might see, for instance, if you encounter a helper animal in the lower world, you might see that animal following you or coming to you in the middle world. You might also get flashes of information, like the story with Tesla. Um, you might start having dreams that tie into your shamanic journey. So after you have a shamanic journey, that your dream the following few nights might provide information that follows up on that dream. You might continue some of your experience in the shamanic journey doing your normal dreams. Um, so that's yes, yeah, and some people do have these experiences that happen spontaneously. In fact, a lot of the most powerful shamans in traditional cultures became shamans not because they trained, not because they deliberately wanted to become a shaman, but because they had sometimes a serious illness like Tesla had, where they almost died, and then during that illness they had a vision that was given to them, and they brought that back with them and recovered from their illness and became a great shaman among their people. Like Black Elk is an example of a shaman who started this way. The shamans of his tribe were trying to. He was an Oglala Sioux. They were trying to heal him. They couldn't heal him, but he had this powerful vision, and he came back and reported this vision to his people and became spiritual leader among them. Negative spirits that you could contact. Well, if you take the view that all of the beings that you encounter are just parts of yourself, reflections of yourself, sure, you see a shadow of yourself. I mean, you might find something that's difficult to deal with, or something that seems to be blocking you. Which this is a common experience on the journey is that you will be trying to get past a place where you feel like there's for instance, you might be going down into the tunnel to reach the lower world, a place that's too narrow that you can't get through. Or you might find as you're traveling in the lower world that there's a blockade that you're not being allowed to pass from point A to point B. And these are, I believe, these are just reflections of your own internal conflicts. And the way to get around those is to ask the helping animal to for assistance in finding your way through these blockages. I've never encountered anything that was that I regard as being a dangerous spirit in any of my journeys. Um, how can we continue the journey in the Norwegian woods? Gareth asks. Well, that's a perfect place to journey, and sitting outside in the woods is a way to connect with the nature spirits that are all around you. And all you need is a little bit of drumming or a didgeridoo, some sort of auditory input that will help to drop you back to that space. Ugesh says, what happens if you see people from your real world in the journey? I guess it depends on the context of seeing them. Sometimes if you're journeying with other people, we found doing the journeys at UC Santa Cruz, if you're journeying with other people, you'll journey together and you'll see either those people or you'll see their helping spirits in the other world as you're traveling. And this just means you're part of the same field, I guess. If you see another person in a dream, it just sort of depends on how, or in a journey, it depends on how that's presented. It could be that you're being directed to interact with that person in a certain way. So again, it sort of would depend on the context of that. What does it mean? It means that there's some connection between you and that person that needs to be addressed, I would say. Okay, goodbye, Christina. Thanks for coming. Okay, so if you're for a source of the a way to listen to this drumming at the shamanic rhythm, as I mentioned, I have a CD I made, which I've been bringing to NLP at Santa Cruz. But if you're interested in getting hold of that, it's available at journeytogenius.com, Robert Dilts' bookstore. It's available for in the UK. Send it to the UK. The CD it can easily be shipped to the UK. I can also arrange to get it to you in digital form if that saves on the postage, and that's easier sometimes. Okay, connecting the two worlds. Okay, comparing the two worlds with the subconscious, superconscious mind. I mean, I think that is certainly one way of looking at it. That's not the way that the traditional cultures would see it, but the subconscious and superconscious mind are aspects of modern psychology, and there's ways of understanding the different levels of consciousness. So there's certainly a possibility that that kind of comparison would be valuable. The helping spirits in the lower world, the animal spirits, are usually more concerned with day-to-day issues, with issues that concern vital force energy, rather than with your sort of your destiny or your purpose for being in this in the middle world. They're concerned with day-to-day survival sort of issues, as opposed to long-term career goals and destiny, as I said. So that's sort of how I look at it. And okay, to get it in digital form, you can contact me at shamancia.com, or let me type in. Here's a you can write to me at this email address, Gmail address, Shamancia. Let's make sure I spell it right. Shamancia@gmail.com. You're interested. Okay, let's see. I don't want to leave anybody out. I lost the. All right. Greg is asking, do you feel other beings coming through your body when you lead sessions? I've had an Aboriginal who plays through me and sometimes feels uncomfortable as he is different size and shape. Have any suggestions to deal with this? So, um, so how to do? Okay, that's sometimes I feel that there's someone behind me, um, you know, helping me to keep the rhythm, singing in my ear. But I haven't had the experience of someone overlapping their body with mine. So let's see, the Aboriginal, different size and shape. Well, size and shape are just energy. So maybe if you were that, they're all just configurations of energy, and energy isn't fixed in any way in time or space. I don't know. I would maybe spend time, maybe try and ask the communicate with your Aboriginal friend and just ask him what would make him more comfortable, or try and find a way to connect more deeply, maybe through dance, through movement, something that involves both bodies. That might be a suggestion. Um, as I said, usually when I have someone, a being coming to help me, it's someone that stands beside me and sort of whispers in my ear. Okay. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions I missed here. Subconscious mind. We were talking about that a little bit. These are all just maps, subconscious, conscious, left hemisphere, right hemisphere. All of these are uh, all of these are just maps, and to the extent that they're helpful, they're useful. To the extent that they mislead us. Okay, constant beat at 205 to 220 beats per minute. Uh, yeah, that Cameron, that's the target frequency there for the drumming. 205 to 220 beats per minute, which if you look at it in terms of seconds, it falls in that range of the theta frequency. And Greg, yeah, go ahead, do the dance thing. The dance he does is rather bizarre. Yeah. Yeah, I did a journey once where I encountered a bear spirit, and the bear spirit showed me this bear dance and wanted me to dance with him, and that was bizarre too, but it was very powerful. I mean, to because of the bear's body was different from mine, and the way the bear moved was different from me. And I was trying to track him and do the same moves he made, and it was uh, it was bizarre, but it was interesting. Okay, so inner dialogue. Yeah, stopping inner dialogue is always a challenge for any practice that you're going to do. Um, so it's a I guess that's a skill that needs to be learned, and it's a discipline that needs to happen. And so here's a piece of advice for that. When you study, if you've ever studied meditation, there's a famous teacher who said, don't expect your mind to be other than what it is. Your mind's nature is like a frog, and if you take a frog and put it on a plate in the middle of your lap, the frog is going to try and jump off. That's what frogs do. So when the frog jumps off, you just pick it up and put it back. I mean, your mind is active. Your mind bounces around because that's its nature, and you can't expect it to be other than what it is. You just have to keep putting it back. So whenever your dialogue starts, you just have to quiet it down again. And your dialogue is going to start, and you just quiet down again, just like that frog back on the plate. And pretty soon your frog will realize that it just needs to be quiet and sit there for a while. Um, so Ingrid's asking, what is the difference between shamanic traditions, for example, in Siberia, North America, and Polynesia? Um, the I guess what's important here is really how they're similar, and that's what Michael Hunter calls core shamanism. But each tradition has its own terminology. They don't call themselves shamans, except in Siberia and among the Evenki. That term is something that was used by anthropologists and applied globally to all these other cultures that had similar types of traditions. The details of these traditions are very different. They use, as I said, they use different methods in order to start their journeys. They explain their experiences in different ways. When they encounter spirits in these other worlds, they have different. They'll tell you that they're completely different. But what we're looking at here is the core element that they all share, and that is this notion of a journey to these other worlds, and the drumming isn't used by everybody either. I mean, each culture has different techniques, but the end result is the same. So if you're interested, I can provide some sources where you can read about these different traditions and what's similar about them and what's different. Yeah, well, Gareth says that the CD is not as good as a live drum, which is always true. And yes, there are the Sami people in Scandinavia still may have vestiges. The thing is that the shamanic traditions are disappearing everywhere as modern Western culture encroaches on everybody. So it's very hard to find places where it's still preserved in a purer form. Um, I don't know the Sami in your area. I don't know how much they've been influenced and impacted by modern culture. Okay, travels in the upper world. Need about travels in the upper world, and my own personal experiences. I went up and found that I could climb smoke coming from a chimney as if it were, and as I followed it up farther and farther, it brought me to the moon, and so I found myself wandering around on the moon, and there was a beautiful castle there made of ice, and in the courtyard of the castle was a fountain, but instead of water coming out of the fountain, there were little pieces of ice that would fall and break and tinkle as they landed on the edge of the fountain. I went into the fountain to try and into the castle to try and find to try and see who was waiting to meet me there, and it was a sort of a maze of rooms followed from place to place, and finally I ran into um, a person in one of the rooms who was wearing a mask, and I realized that it was myself hiding from myself. So that was one of my journeys to the upper world. Is the oracle of the Dalai Lama tradition to be considered a shaman? The the background of Tibetan Buddhism is before the people in Tibet were converted to Buddhism, they had a shamanic practice, a shamanic religion called Bon. And so a lot of those Bon traditions have kind of survived in disguised form in modern Tibetan Buddhism. So there's a lot of, if you look closely, a lot of the practices in Tibetan Buddhism go back to a previous shamanic religion, shamanic-based religion. So this oracle tradition is probably one of the main jobs of a shaman was divination, was interpreting omens and telling people what was going to happen. You know, they continued in the same route they were going. So a lot of the ancient oracle traditions are shamanic in essence. Okay. I hope that answered your question. I think someone else is typing. Anyway, it's getting on to 1 o'clock here. So I guess uh, I'll be happy to answer any other questions. You can write to me at that address that I gave or through Camilla. And I thank everybody. This is great. This is I wasn't expecting such a huge um, I wasn't expecting such a huge turnout, and I'm thanks to all of you for putting up with me. This is kind of strange. I feel like I'm talking to myself here. So so thanks a lot. And if you're interested, I'll be talking more about using shamanism on your own for searching in the next session on February 1st. Thanks, everybody. Blessings to you all. This is wonderful. Thanks for all your energy. I can feel it pouring out. I can feel it pouring out through the computer as you're typing all these things. And I miss all you guys that from NLPU, and hopefully we'll see some of you in the summer. Thanks a lot. Okay, yeah, I'll pass on your greetings. Okay, good. Love to you all. All right, I'm going to shut down the video now. Yes.